In the Louvre in Paris, there is a painting so vast it swallows an entire wall, nearly 5 meters tall and 7 meters wide. For centuries, a canvas that size was reserved for one kind of subject and one kind only: a god, a saint, a king crowned in glory, an army winning some great and famous victory. This painting shows none of that. It shows a raft, a crude platform of lashed-together timber, adrift on the open sea, and heaped upon it a tangle of human bodies, some straining toward the horizon, some slumped in exhaustion, and some very plainly already dead. There is no hero here, no god, no king. Only ordinary people dying. And the reason visitors stop and stand and cannot quite bring themselves to walk away is this: every one of those people was real. It happened. It happened only a few years before the picture was painted, which is why the canvas puts so simple and so terrible a question to everyone who stands before it. Who were these people? And what did they do to end up out there, abandoned at the edge of the world? It begins in 1816 aboard a French frigate called the Méduse. She was bound for the west coast of Africa with some 400 souls aboard, soldiers, officials, settlers, whole families, sailing out to take possession of a colony in Senegal. And the man in command was a disaster waiting to happen, a nobleman who had been handed the ship not for his seamanship, but for his politics, for the people he knew, and who had scarcely set foot on a deck in 20 years. He sailed exactly as you would dread. He drove the Méduse out ahead of the rest of the convoy, waved away the sailors who warned him the water was turning shallow, and steered hard for the coast. And on the 2nd of July, with no storm, no enemy, nothing to blame but his own carelessness, the largest ship in the fleet ran fast aground on a sandbank. Even then, it need not have become a catastrophe. Almost everyone was still alive, and the coast was not impossibly far. But the ship's boats could not come close to carrying 400 people, so the crew tore the Méduse apart and lashed her timbers into a raft, 20 meters of flat, sodden wood, with no sail, no rudder, and barely any sides. Then came the decision the whole painting is really about: who would ride and who would drift. The governor took a boat. The captain took a boat. The officers and the well-connected took the boats. And roughly 150 of everyone else, the soldiers, the sailors, the nameless and the powerless, were herded onto the raft, so many of them that it sank beneath their weight and left them standing waist-deep in the sea. The plan sounded reasonable enough. The boats would take the raft in tow and pull it to shore. For a short while they did. And then the ropes went slack. The survivors would always swear the boats had cut them loose on purpose, that the men at the oars, feeling the dead weight of the raft dragging behind them, simply let go and rowed for their own lives. The officers told it differently. But the outcome was beyond dispute. The boats made for the coast, and the raft was left where it lay, in the middle of the ocean, with 150 people upon it. What came next lasted 13 days. The very first night was a slaughter. The sea broke straight over the timbers and dragged people screaming into the dark, and in the crush and the terror the survivors turned on one another. Men, killing men on a slab of wood with nowhere to run, and nothing beneath their feet but the bodies of the fallen. Their food was lost to the waves almost at once. The little wine that remained was hoarded and fought over, and shared among fewer mouths with every passing day. Some died of thirst, some of their wounds, some by murder, some by walking quietly off the edge into the water, and when at last there was nothing left to eat, the living began to feed on the dead. Day by day, the raft grew emptier and quieter. By the 13th day, out of that 150, just 15 were still breathing, and most of those could no longer stand. And then one of them saw a sail. A ship had risen on the horizon, and they hauled themselves upright and waved whatever they could reach: a rag, a shirt, a scrap of cloth, anything to be seen, and the ship sailed on. It never saw them. It shrank and thinned and slipped away over the rim of the world. Think about that for a moment. 13 days. 15 souls left alive out of 150. Salvation itself appears on the water and then it vanishes. The ship did come back. 2 hours later it returned and lifted the 15 from the raft. But they could not know that. For those 2 hours, all they knew was that rescue had come and looked straight through them and gone. And that precise instant, the ship in sight, and no soul aboard the raft yet knowing whether it will turn, is the moment the painting captures. Not the dying, not the cannibalism, not the rescue. The single heartbeat in which everything still hangs in the balance. The men in the boats had assumed the story would sink along with the raft. It did not. 2 of the survivors, a surgeon and an engineer, set down everything that had happened and published it, and France recoiled because the whole affair read less like an accident than an accusation. An unfit captain, given a warship for the friends he kept. The powerful stepping calmly into the lifeboats. The ordinary and the expendable left to rot on the raft, and then politely forgotten. To a great many people, this was no mere shipwreck. It was the whole country in miniature, the privileged rowing serenely to safety, while everyone else drowned for their mistakes. The captain was tried and sentenced to 3 years in prison, and the government would have dearly loved for the matter to end there and fade from memory. It did not fade because of one man. A young painter named Théodore Géricault, barely into his 20s, read the survivor's account and could not put it down, and he resolved to make the whole of France look at what it had done. He did not do it by halves. He hunted down the survivors and questioned them for hours. He had one of them, a carpenter, build him a scale model of the raft. He haunted the hospital wards to watch the dying and the morgue to study the dead. He is said to have carried severed limbs and even a severed head back to his studio and painted them there until he understood precisely what death looked like on human skin. He filled more than 100 studies before his brush ever touched the final canvas. And then he painted it at the scale of gods and emperors, 7 meters of it, and turned all that borrowed grandeur upon a handful of men the world had thrown away. Stand before the finished work, and your eye is drawn upward on a journey. It begins at the bottom, in shadow, among the dead and the near dead, an old man cradling a lifeless youth, figures too spent to lift their heads. Then the painting begins to rise. Body upon body, the figures climb, one man turning, another straining upward, the whole desperate mass of them surging toward the top. At the very summit, one figure reaches higher than the rest, waving a cloth toward the far-off ship. The whole composition narrows toward that gesture, concentrating every remaining hope on one tiny point at sea. And the thing he strains toward, the ship that carries the entire hope of every soul on the raft, is little more than a smudge upon the horizon. So small you must hunt for it, exactly as they did. That is what makes this painting one of the most important ever made. For centuries, the highest art had been kept for noble things, for myth and scripture, and the triumphs of kings. Géricault took a raw and shameful piece of recent news, something torn straight from the headlines, and painted it with all the weight and scale of a masterpiece. He raised a monument to the very people the powerful had tried to erase, and he made it impossible to look away. The state could try one captain and pray the rest was quietly forgotten. But the boats had already left the raft behind once, and Géricault made certain that France could never do it a second time.